For my honors project, I'm interviewing Mr. Perigard, who has done a lot of work with Shakespeare in his career and has agreed to speak with me today. So could you explain to me a little bit about your experience with Shakespeare? How did you start?
Sure. Mostly, like I told you when you asked me to do this, you were going to interview a Shakespeare scholar, I laughed because I don't think of myself as a scholar in this way, in any way. I come to it as a theater, both as an actor and as a director, and my experience with Shakespeare has been, I've taken some classes, some English classes through high school and through college where we read Shakespeare. I guess I've taken some classes where the focus was solely that, but mostly it's been about performing Shakespeare, directing Shakespeare, and being involved in and actually producing the work. Every time I read one, and that's the great thing about Shakespeare, is you tend not to go away from it. Like you read it, but then you will come back to it. You will see it, perform it, direct it, work on it, and you read it again. And as many times as I read it, it's a different experience. They're so full.
So I know you've been on both sides of performance, so you've been on stage and directing.
Mm-hmm.
How do the experiences compare?
Direct one of these plays takes so much work. The amount of work that you have to do, research and analyzing the text and working with the actors and making sure that even cutting the scripts, it's intense. So being an actor is intense too, but it's much more focused, and it's much, to me, it's, I will say it's easier, but that's just a generalization. If
That's
you really
great.
find it. Yeah.
What were you in Romeo and Juliet?
I was Capulet once and Benvolio once.
How was it being
Completely different. The one where I was Capulet is like maybe the worst production of Romeo and Juliet ever. It was really bad.
Why?
And well, I think because the director didn't really have a great idea of what he wanted to say with it. So it was, you're gonna laugh when I say this because I'm laughing too. It was kind of in this nondescript, futuristic world. So it was, and to me, we all thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And I was younger when we did this, but to me it was just a lack of having any sense of what you wanted to say with it, which is lazy. And I don't think you can be. Do you know what I mean? It was like, well, we'll put it in this nondescript place and not be specific about it. And it just didn't give us much to play, and I think that came across, and we were all embarrassed about it. It just wasn't a good production.
Well, you touched on time period.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you feel about modernization of the scripts and placing it in different settings?
I love it as long as it's based in the text and in something that is important to you, something that you're passionate about as a director, as a producing team, that you bring something to it that says, here's why we're going to put it here, not to make a random decision like this Romeo and Juliet production I was talking about, not to just do something different to do something different. I mean, Shakespeare was taking plays and stories and things that existed long before him. Very few of the plays he wrote did he actually create. They're all taken from histories, and I know he used the Roman playwrights a lot, or Plutarch, or there were lots of sources for all the stories, and he was recreating for his time. So for us to do that, I think that's why they've lasted so long. So I'm all for it. I think it takes a lot of work to choose a setting, to choose a time period that makes sense and supports what you want to say, but is really rooted in the text and in what he wrote. It's a whole process, and I love doing that. That's fun to do.
And I guess on the same vein as modernization, how do you feel about censorship with changing times and how a lot of the language would be considered crude now or vulgar in some regards?
Yeah, he loves being crude, and he was writing for a huge range of an audience, from aristocratic and royalty all the way down to mostly for the common person. So there is so much that is crude and in there. No, I'm not a big fan of censorship of any kind. I don't really see the need for it. There's so much double entendre, and there's so much. I don't even know what I can say on this. I don't want to be offensive, but there's so much that is sex jokes everywhere. Like, if you ask yourself, oh, is that a sex joke? The answer is yes, it is. And I think that's part of what makes him, he's just so funny and witty and clever, and, yes, some of it can be a bit too much, and I tend to cut more for, does it come across? Does it make the point that it That's usually where cuts are made more now, less than censoring it because it's dirty.
Mm-hmm.
It also fills
funny.
in what his world was. I mean, I think it's a part of experiencing. I'm just not a fan of cutting. It's a part of what he was trying to say, who he was writing for, and how that play came to be. I think one of the reasons he's lasted is because he writes about love and the heart and passion that we all understand. And that's on all kinds of levels. And that has to do with sex and with longing and desire and lust and greed and murder and all kinds of things. And sex falls right in there. It's such an important driving force in to a lot of what he's writing about and why his characters do what they do. His understanding of love, both from the male perspective and the female perspective, and even though he was writing for men to perform, he really had a good understanding of what that was. And I think, and the romance that is there in the language and in the way he wrote and in the way his characters approach each other.
It's incredible. And also you've touched on how that he's sort of this like freeze frame for time of the era and the culture. And so we've talked about how sexuality has played into it, but how would like general events going on during that time period influence his work?
His plays are very different in a lot of ways. And you can even follow like his early works or his middle period or his later works. They're all really different. Like you can really group them together in his, not immature works, but as he was developing, is usually where the comedies are, and then the tragedies and the histories kind of come in the middle. And his later plays are the ones that are the problem plays is what people call them, and they're the romances, but they're usually these really dark comedies. People have gone back and forth on what they label them, but to me that actually follows kind of what was going on in theater and historically, and what was going on in the culture at the time. He was working to please the audience, but they're very different as I think people's tastes were changing and what people were looking for in theater was changing too, and as he was developing as a writer. So I think it's very important. Again, the stories he told were stories that people generally knew or had heard of or were from other tales. They weren't his own stories for the most part.
How do you feel about Shakespeare being analyzed in the classroom?
Love it. I think it's great. I think it's because any production you do as a director, those are the first couple of weeks of rehearsal, is sitting around a table analyzing the text.
Okay.
And you have to do that. You have to all have an understanding of why you're saying what you're saying, how you're saying it, and why he wrote it the way that he did. What does the poetry do? Where does it change? Why does it change? It's usually the difference between good Shakespeare and bad Shakespeare. Do you pull them in right off the bat and make them feel welcome and make them feel like they don't have to work really, really hard to get it? If you don't do that, you're kind of you're out of luck. You're done. The audience has checked out, and you don't want that. Like you said, every time you come back to it and read one, you bring a different experience to it, have a different experience with the piece. And if I see something great, I saw a production of All's Well That Ends Well, a long time ago now, probably like 10 or 15 years ago. I had never read the play or experienced it, and I thought, wasn't in the mood to see it. And it caught me so off guard, and so I've loved that play. You never see it performed. This was in Central Park, the summer Shakespeare that they do in Central Park, and I was kind of obsessed with that for a while. That's what I love.
What do you think goes into a good Shakespeare production? So when you see these plays that then you become obsessed with, what is it about that makes it so?
Clean, clear approach. Like everybody's on the same page. Everybody has a real understanding of why they're doing it and really is telling the same story. That's true of any theater though. But I think with Shakespeare, there's so many subplots and so many directions to go, and it's like he just throws 100 things into a blender and you've got this play, but it's not that loose. It's structured in a way that you have to be really clear about what you're doing. And I think it's easy to not be clear, so I think that's what makes plays work. And fun, have fun with it. The language is so great, and there's so much to play with for actors, and that passion behind it, and fun, and commitment to the story. Romeo and Juliet, because it's about young people, I would look for a time period, and it probably would be contemporary, that your age audience would connect to. And there might be that there was a period in history that speaks to that, of younger people being told they couldn't do, some are being repressed or being kept down or something, or groups being kept apart. But so much in our society today is about, different factions and groups of people, and how are we all dealing with each other and not dealing with each other, and who are different. I'd use Capulets and Montagues as that kind of, I think it fit great to do it today. And I think particularly with this audience who, I don't know if the collegiate audience really enjoys Shakespeare, really wants to come see it, I think that would be a perfect one, because it's about people your age to do it and set it in today. And this as the time period, and then find a good place and a good concept.
And then to impact people who of my generation, would you use race or continue to use just like family ties?
I don't know, but that's where I go. If we're doing it today, race is just such a big, important thing that we need to be talking about, and we're not, and we try to, and then we don't, and it would be great to find a way to have that be a part of it. Yeah, I think it would be hard to do a play like Romeo and Juliet set it today and not have race, have us be thinking about race.
I feel like if it's done really well, even if you don't understand every word that they're saying, you can understand the message.
Yeah.
And that's when it's so impactful. Like we had a moment in class where we were describing like the scene, the first dialogue between Romeo and Juliet, and our teacher was reading it to us, and just sort of like the energy and everything about the words, and we truly understood all the metaphors and the way we analyzed it, but also just listened to it, just sort of sat back and absorbed it. It was really impactful to me.
Yeah.
And it was sort of crazy. It's one of those moments that I won't forget, because it was just so resonant. So I've always struggled with the language, because it makes it difficult, as with everybody, but I've always been interested by it.
Good. And as to always struggling with it, the more you read it, the easier it gets. And every time, I'm not talking about rereading a play, I'm talking about every time you pick up a new play that you haven't read before, it will be easier to read the next one, and easier to read and keep going. I agree with exactly what you just said, though, about how hearing it and doing it can make you feel something that you don't see when you read it on the page. That's great.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. It really means a lot.
I hope this was helpful and not just a little
No,
babble.
it was. I promise.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.